Hey, Desert Dwellers, Karl Forehand with the Desert Sanctuary. Hi, just a couple of notes before we get started. I had the privilege to sit down with my friend, Stuart, Delony, and have a really good conversation about the He Gets Us campaign. Just a couple of notes. During the podcast taping, we're listening to a song called Little Boxes by Malvina Reynolds, and I couldn't get permission to leave it in, so we took it out. But you might listen to that song and think about it. Talks about suburban America and how we civilized it, but also you might think about how that relates to Christianity sometimes. Also, from the article that we used from the Texas Observer about the He Gets Us campaign from March 6th of this year, the author's name is Wendy Gordon, and I referred to her repeatedly as he. So I hope the author please forgive me. And Stuart tried to interrupt a couple of times, but I just kept rambling on, saying the wrong pronoun, and I apologize. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show.
Hello and welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. Laura is not here today, but thankfully I have another co-host, Stuart Delony. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited that he's here. I told him before we started recording, I'm just a little nervous about all this, but I think we'll get through it. I think we'll do okay. Stuart,
I think we'll be fine. I had issue when you asked me to. You wanted me to wear my hair like Laura's. I was a little like Karl. But for you, I
went a little too far.
Yeah.
Stuart, as you may know, is the host of the Snarky Faith podcast. Also, a new blog on Pathos that you've been putting a lot of material out there, and it's good. I especially like the review of my book that you did. It was really good. One of the best I've had. So we appreciate that. But we wanted to get started this, and we're just going to start off. We're going to talk about the He Gets Us campaign today, but we wanted to start off with a little music for you. I couldn't see your face when I was playing that, but have you ever heard that song?
I was smiling. There's so much I was thinking about, beyond the fact that we're going to talk a lot about tacky things also.
I was writing this week. I was writing about it's my new novel, but it's all fiction, but some of it kind of snaps back to my childhood. And I remember that in Oklahoma, that subdivision that I lived in, where every single house was exactly alike. And some of them were different colors, and sometimes just shades of different colors. But they're exactly the same, or they were the opposite, floor plan. And, I think sometimes we want to design religion in our society like that. If everybody would just conform, make it easier, and that would be what saves the world. I think, in the Jewish mindset in the first century, was thinking if we could just get people to obey the law and everybody would fall in line, then everything would be okay. And Jesus kind of came and turned that on its head. And said there's a different way. It's a little more nuanced. It takes some creativity, it takes some imagination, and it takes some willpower. But you can't just force people to go down that road, and we even call it a narrow road, right? We can't force people to go down that road and all look and act alike and do what we expect them to do, or we end up with the fascist reality that we had in 2020, 2019, and 2021, and those times. So today we're going to look at, with the help of Stuart, we're going to look at that he gets this campaign, the commercials that are selling a loving human Jesus Christ, which I'm for. I agree with that. I like that idea. But it's kind of like what I see in the NFL right now. So in the NFL, it seems like, and Laura and I kind of, here's what we do anymore. We don't argue vehemently or get mad. We just go, ooh, gross, or Laura says gross. When someone's talking too much or being too Jesus-y or whatever. But a lot of the players, will point up, or some of them exaggerated, and there's all that. And in the end zones right now, it says it takes all of us, which I think that's a good statement, right? It's a vague message, but it's hopeful. That struggle with mental health, some of those things, there's nothing to laugh at. They've decided they have 6 accepted messages they can put on their helmets this year. And I think all of these are good. End racism, stop hate. It takes all of us. Black Lives Matter. Inspire change. Say their stories, meaning, talking about abuse survivors and police brutality and things like that. And so I'm excited for the Black players that have made that progress in the NFL, that it came forward, and there's some alertness, some awareness of the problems. When it comes to NFL players, usually they're not attending the community church back home where they came from. They're attending mega churches. And I want to say to all those NFL people, you're pointing to the sky and attracting young people to church, but you're attracting them to your mega church pastors that are the core of all those problems. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah. And also I found it's interesting too, if we think back to, if you're talking about the NFL, like about all that happened with, if you think about like the trajectory of Tim Tebow and then the trajectory of Colin Kaepernick, and the acceptableness of kneeling and the times when it was not acceptable to kneel. And I remember just so many Christians just getting so angry over the fact of Colin Kaepernick kneeling for a cause, because he was kneeling, and which was even crazy that Christians were upset with this too. It's like he's not kneeling for the flag, for all of this. This is abhorrent to Christianity, and you're kind of like, wait, what? No.
Right.
Yeah. What is your real issue? Is it just because he's an African American that is actually speaking out against bad stuff that you don't like?
Right.
That's probably closer to the truth there too.
Yeah. It goes. The Tiki Taki song is going to come up in this. It's actually called Little Boxes, but it's going to come up in this discussion several times because that's kind of it. We like to say what's moral or what's acceptable or what you can protest. Based on our ideals, and usually it flows down from a white patriarchy idea. It's all right to kneel to pray on the sidelines, but not to kneel for Black children that are getting killed, or for Colin Kaepernick. So I wanted to go back, and my son is a historian. He studied history in the United States. He's now teaching history in Taiwan. And so I wish I would have had him on, and you and he would have had a really funny podcast with lots of good history, but kind of take a step back into history and look at religion a little bit, and see how we've evolved, see how we got to 2020. So in 1917, there was a lady named Carrie Nation. Have you ever heard of Carrie Nation, the hatchet granny? Mm-hmm. She came around the same time. Billy Sunday was 1896, 1935 was his heyday. But she's a funny character to me. She ran around with a hatchet, and she'd just destroy a saloon. And then they would throw it because she was her husband either had severe health issues or died because of alcoholism. So She was against that, and she would trash the saloon, break up all the bottles with her hatchet, then they'd throw her in jail, and then she'd sell hatchets as souvenirs to get out of jail the next day. So she's kind of a character, but from her came probably a big influence for the women's right to vote, but also for prohibition of alcohol came from her. But so Billy Sunday, around that time starts this kind of Jesus and John Wayne trend that Kristen Demure talks about. And the kind of echo behind it was, we need a man to stand up also. We need the men to stand up also. And out of it came kind of that toxic masculinity. And Billy Sunday coined the phrase the sawdust trail, so those aggressive evangelistic campaigns, fear-based type of language and so on. I think Billy Sunday preached 20,000 sermons or something like that,
And we've probably heard a version of this, of all 20,000 of them in our lives from other people that like to do hellfire, brimstone, toxic masculinity. Yeah, that's a historical thread that has led to a lot of crap theologically.
Yeah, and kind of, whether you get rid of a guy like Mark Driscoll or not, his DNA continues down through the people that emulate him, because when he, comes out with an overt cuss word in his sermon and it starts gaining popularity, then people want to emulate that, and they do. And the fear, as Kristen explains, the fear-based motive, creates a lot of action and creates a lot of response. So then we had the 1920s, the Roaring 20s, the prosperity, giving religion the finger. That's what I wrote down. Eventually, in 1929, because of all the spending, the stock market crashes. And then we had the 30s. So fun for me to write my novel about the old hotel here in town and think about what it would be like to live back then in the 20s and 30s. My grandparents were born in that era. I don't think they were roaring at all. I think they were probably part of the crowd that sat back and looked at how crazy it was. But in the 1930s, then prohibition, gold, and then we have the Great Depression. Why? Because there's no alcohol, right? That's the Great Depression.
It would be difficult.
I imagine people of the 1930s saying, see, look what happens. Look what happens when you have a good time. Look what happens when you go to dances. The Baptist take on it.
Yeah, or like, oh, this is really God caused this.
Right.
Type of thing to teach us. This was all about teaching us.
That's right.
Whatever that means. But yeah. We still have that stuff today, too. It's funny when they talk about things like that, too, where we blame God on all sorts of nonsense that we've created.
Absolutely. In 1940s, World War II, and some prosperity. War always brings prosperity. So the prosperity started to come back. Greater fear. Billy Graham came to fame. He was preaching for a while with youth organizations, but he came to fame in 1949 when he incorporated the fear dynamic to his messages. So even though we think of Billy Graham as a little more inclusive, he was still a John Wayne, in a certain way. The fact that he did you ever go to a Billy Graham crusade? I did not. I've seen him on TV.
It's so bizarre when I went to one. It's got to be in the 90s. And my parents are a part of a large Baptist church in the area. And I remember, they're like, you have to go to this. You have to see him speak. You have to do this. And it's an evangelistic event. I've been saved in their regard since I was like 6. I've been baptized, but I need to go here. And it was weird seeing a church charter buses for church people to go listen to Billy Graham, people that in their own like evangelical idea, hey, let's take a bunch of saved people to go listen to Billy Graham preach about getting saved.
Right.
And it was just weird. And then you also have like half the church just going down because, I mean, if you recommit your life to Billy Graham, I mean, I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
That is the best way you could ever do it because that counts more in heaven somehow. I don't know.
I have a pastor that I kind of followed into ministry. I didn't get into ministry till I was 33, and he's one of the best preachers I've ever heard. And you might not recognize his name, but he was such a salesman that I had to counsel people when he brought them down the aisle, and they didn't know why they were there. They literally, I said, what's your decision, or and they didn't know. They just knew they had to get down there. And I think preachers modeled that got in our DNA, that, a little bit of fear goes a long ways. And we can use, I've heard evangelists say, this whole world's on fire. We got to save the world, and it's that kind of language. And then fear of the Russians and fear of whatever superpower is out there.
Yep.
It's interesting.
It's like Mad Libs. Just fill in, who do we hate now?
Yeah. I find it interesting that the country that we feared the most for so long basically got beat by an unarmed country recently. In the 1950s, 1950s is perfect in the eyes of a lot of people. Probably when Donald Trump said, "Make America Great Again," a lot of people thought of the 1950s, where women could vote, but minorities, weren't recognized as equal people, and still a ton of things wrong with the 1950s. But we had green kitchens, right? One wife with high heels that had high heels on all the time, right? Green kitchens.
I grew up in the wrong era. I keep trying to tell my wife to do that, and she just gives me a dirty look.
Right.
Like, stop it.
Her hair was always done. 2 kids, right? 1 car. Maybe it's a form of nuclear family, right? It's the original nuclear family. Civilized, but still a fear-based religion. We don't ever want to go back to that chaos. This is all organized and simple, and we all know what's going on. The man goes to work. The wife stays home, stays fit, wears her high heels, and we do it, the way we've always done it, right? I think of my grandma when I think of the 50s because she was very much like that. She was an educated, sophisticated woman, and she worked, but she kind of carried that model forward into the times when I knew her later. My mom didn't ever really fall into that too much, but then the 1950s issue of everything's perfect, but we're still going to keep preaching fear and keep this thing civilized. Then the 1960s, I always say the 1960s really began in the 50s because the civil rights movement started in 54, right? And rock and roll was earlier than the 60s. It's kind of when society said, wait a minute, this doesn't seem human, what we're doing. It seems more like a robot, and robots were in their infancy then. I think the civil rights movement started before that. The Jesus movement comes right after that, right? And just where people are starting to say, maybe there's a more human way to do this. Maybe it's not about control and predictability and all those things. So
and in that time too, you have like the sexual revolution, and everything just begins to change. And I think as you begin, what's interesting is I think as you begin to see people starting to rebel against the systems, I think you also see the religious systems get even more stiff-necked against everybody else. And yeah, I think being able to sell some of that, really selling hate,
right,
works well for the church. Who's bad? Who do we not like?
Yeah.
Just anyone that doesn't look like us.
Right.
But it works. It works for a crowd. People like being in an area where they can go, oh, we're the good ones. We're the good ones.
Yeah. We're a lot of times when I write, I say, we're right and God is on our side. So,
Yeah.
who cares if they don't like us? We have our group that we know is right. We know we're doing the right thing. We know, and we're not going to be the ones that are sorry later, that kind of language. But that changed at the end of the 70s, right? I was trying to remember the guy that Falwell met with.
Oh, you're thinking of the end when like the birth of the religious right, or the moral
majority, yeah. Just breaking in here for a moment, that was Francis Schaeffer that we were talking about when Francis Schaeffer met with Jerry Falwell Sr. That meeting was famous because Falwell says to him, abortion is not really our thing. That's a Catholic thing. We don't really do that, and he had been on the other side of the abortion issue in previous years. But when he was convinced that this would win politically and that with, solidarity of various Christian religions into that mindset, then we can form this group around that one issue. And so thus is born the religious right, the moral majority. Reagan's elected in 1980, right? Who was formerly a Democrat, like Trump.
I know, yeah.
Formerly a Democrat, not a great guy, really. And like many of the Jesus and John Wayne guys, not a great guy, but they convinced him to go down that road to gather this. And even though Republicans were in charge, I can't think of a lot of things that happened in the 80s that they really accomplished, other than just garnering all this, a lot of strange hair, a lot of weird costumes and music and things like that bled over into the 90s. Right. It
was like, yeah, especially music wise, it was such a weird confluence. I think of like 60s and 70s all coming to a head during that point.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, you're mentioning this, and I don't know if this will touch on it, but that's we also had like the satanic panic going on. Yeah. I remember like when people would back mask music to make you listen to stuff backwards,
right?
Just to create that fear everywhere. I remember like at church, someone being like, "You have to listen to this. It's Prince's Purple Rain. This one part says something about the devil." It's just gibberish and it's nonsense.
Right.
But again, that was selling that control. That fear, whether it's Russia, whether it's Satan hiding everywhere, it was just creating this whole fear-based narrative that the hellfire and brimstone pastors knew always worked well.
Yeah. I started being a pastor in 1997. So about 10 years after that. And it was perfectly normal when some youth from our church on my second Sunday just stood up and played the song, I Wish We'd All Been Ready. You remember that? Just gross, as Laura would say.
Yes.
And, we're all real rapture centered, and like you say, real fear based.
That's like Tim LaHaye's got the whole Left Behind thing cranking during that period of time as well, too. Yeah, so add to that fear base that, oh no, any moment a trumpet will be sounded, and then we're just going to find like empty clothes everywhere. That was like the fear as a kid. And you're like, oh, I don't want to be left behind.
Yeah.
Though I never thought about the fact that all of those people that were being raptured were people that, even though I was in church, I never really liked. So being left behind, I don't know if it's going to matter.
Right. I remember, in the late 70s and 80s, we were in a church called, it was a Baptist church, but they used to have their favorite evangelist was Jack Hyles. I don't know if you know that name. Mm-hmm. Jack Hyles would promote, he said, I tell my son, if someone insults your sister, you beat them bloody, was the words he would use. And there was that type of not even toxic masculinity, but just extremism, in the evangelical world. And we went to a private school at that time at that church, who the nursery workers carried around belts in nursery school. And
oh my goodness.
we'd run away from, I was older than nursery age, but when they would, I was staying there because my mom worked there, and me and this other guy would run away. We'd just leave. Maybe I have to get a whipping later, but it won't be as bad as enduring this all day long, and we were checked out kind of most of the time. But a lot of indoctrination, even though, and so late night, you get into the 90s and maybe the 2000s and up to 2009. I wrote 2099, but that's not right. We haven't got there yet. 2009.
Karl, you're being prophetic.
Oh man, I heard a prophetic person on YouTube today. He's talking about the 19th of this month, which is already passed, when Christ was coming back again.
Did we miss it again?
Yeah.
Dang it.
Back in those days, we would say 83 reasons why Christ is coming back in 83. And then I graduated from high school in 83. And there was 84 reasons why he's coming in 84. But I think after that stuff kind of had its day, then there was Mark Driscoll, emerging church. So and I'm not real good with specific dates, so you can correct me if I get things a little backwards. But Rob Bell preaches the Mars Hill message and starts his church. Mark Driscoll starts the Mars Hill Church in a different place. And you have Rob Bell, which some of us can respect, Mark Driscoll, which very few of us can respect. But
wait, you told me you respected him before we started recording, Karl. I'm leaving right now. No, for those that can't read, that's heavy sarcasm.
Yeah, sorry.
You know that we both do not like Mark Driscoll. He's an asshole.
Yeah, and out of that comes, the emergent church, the emerging churches, and I don't even understand all that. And like I said, I became a pastor in '97 when all that was going on, but I was just oblivious to it, power and control. A lot of those guys eventually failed. Driscoll kind of failed miserably eventually, but his DNA lives on. There's people that were emulating.
Oh, he still has a church.
I know he still has a church.
Disgusting, but it's,
it's much smaller.
I mean, I get, yeah. And
he did experience that great crash, probably not in his brain, but he eventually kind of goes away for a while and comes back. Hillsong, becomes monumental.
Yeah.
Then falls, where I don't know if they're recovering now or not, but for sure, there's a Darlene Check lookalike at almost every church that mimics their music and the way that music controls people and things like that. So what I wrote down was the semen of their toxic masculinity and ultra church mentality lives on.
It works, especially if you're talking about Driscoll. I mean, because I think Driscoll's also famous for so gross, but referring to like his wife's lady parts as his penis's home, as well. Where you're just like, why? You're just gross. But I will add to this. I think, especially moving into talking about what we will talk about with the He Gets Us. Also, that time period that we're kind of talking about in broad terms, that's also purpose-driven everything. Which I know that I have issues with because it's just marketing and it's teaching churches to market themselves. And so I think there was that also. I think that also, Saddleback was definitely part of the whole megachurch movement and the whole purpose-driven crap that happened around it, to where there were churches that you could buy just Bill Hybels' teachings that you could just watch on video. I remember that starting too, where people are like, oh, this purpose-driven thing's so important. Instead of our pastor preaching, here's a video. Which I feel so corporate and so like franchise, which is really what mega churches are now.
Yeah. So we have there's a mutual guy that both you and I know, but I don't want to mention his name because I don't want to hurt him. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But he would describe some of those times back in 2009 and before, where all that stuff was moving so fast and people getting so much stage time and making so much money for ministry that you didn't dare criticize it even or write a blog about someone. There was kind of a guy that's known for abuse, and he was called out once because he agreed too much with Driscoll, and somebody called him out on it. And this person described the kind of quote unquote hitman that came out of the woods to come after him as just traumatic. And he won't hardly talk about it now because there was so much of that going on, and they might not have agreed with Driscoll philosophically or theology wise, but they mimicked his mannerisms and mimicked his way of doing things. And there's so many branches and legs and different DNA of that spreads out into the church that's alive and well today. So, but on this next part, I said 2005 to 2010 I think people started deconstructing. The people that kind of went before me, like Brian Zond, and some of them were 2005. So that's why I use that date. But between those years, a lot of people, and I think the church eventually reacted to it. Eventually in politics, you have Obama in 2008, and the white patriarchal church didn't care for that at all. Even though, I can real honestly look back across the presidents we've had over the last 50, 60 years, and I think he's the most respectable.
Yeah, and maybe this is also a thread of that from probably the 70s and 80s coming into it. But I mean, I know that Christianity is so horny for finding who's like the new Antichrist. Mm-hmm. At any moment, it's like, oh, Obama's the Antichrist. Oh, no, now they're the Antichrist. I mean, pick one and stick with it. If you guys are really believing you're left behindness, there's only one. That's what Paul really meant. He didn't. But when we talk about Antichrist, but it's always interesting how we're always trying, I grew up around that conservatism where you're always kind of looking for who's the devil out there. Yeah. Who's the bad one? Who's leading us? The devil
behind every bush. And you're just trying to find him. And of course, now it's Biden and so on. But I think that what happened in maybe 2016 to 2021 or 2019 to 2021, wherever you see that explosion happening of Trumpism and so on. And to me, that would be characterized by, Q followers, Trumpism, all of that stuff. When Hillary said the deplorables and Trump picked up all those and, used his way of gathering people together. When all that stuff exploded was, kind of all this coming together, the need for fear and control, the loss of control, what happened in the 60s when they lost some control, and then when they lost a lot of control, in the early 2000s. And then it's that desperateness of the we're losing the world. It's Trump used that language before the insurrection. If you want to have a country left, not that it's going to be slightly different under a Democrat than a Republican, but if you want to have a country left, you're going to have to do this, right? And so I think that's the point we got to.
I will say this: you will maybe disagree with me as I initially say it. Then let me unpack it. But I think the whole Trump thing was a blessing. In a weird way. I do. I think it was horrible and disgusting, but I also think it was a time period with especially the moral majority and all these other. I feel like everybody showed their cards. They started singing the quiet parts out loud and feeling comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
And it's now that is awful and that is rot. But at the same time, I think people had just been hiding their awful rot, and we didn't realize it because we thought, oh, civil rights, we've done better. We're getting there. Yay.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we're not at all. No, no, no. We're just fooling ourselves.
You're up
The
for
church. Yeah, the church still stands for something. Then you have all the evangelicals just propping up Trump. And you're like, no, not that either. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys, for showing us your cards. It was a lovely time period. It was horrible, but...
Right. To use a modern metaphor, Lauren Boebert, right? So the way to do it is to do like Lauren and Marjorie and some of those do it. But it ends up, in the movie theater where people are being normal and she's getting felt up and making a scene. So many evangelicals have fallen, but I don't put it entirely on the evangelicals. I put it on, we had a guest, I think the last guest that we interviewed kept saying it's baked into the cake, it's systemic, and it's real hard to explain to people that have a systemic problem. There's a systemic problem. It doesn't make sense to them because it's their way of life. We're going to get into this after the break. We're going to get into this He Gets Us campaign and kind of go down through that bit by bit. We appreciate you staying with us today. It's a little bit tedious to go through all the details and to build some back history and all those kind of things, but I hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you in just a few minutes. Yeah, I don't have the fancy Stuart Delony equipment to fade out or anything. I'm just low tech. And I think you are too, aren't you?
Oh, I am. I always do it afterwards anyways. But no, what hit me listening to it again, I didn't pay attention to the words. But all that we're talking about, I was thinking about, like, when you mentioned the patriarchy, it was, and then, like, how that's connected to the church. And hopefully this will connect. But what's dawning on me was, I remember raising our kids when they were younger, and my parents are definitely boomers and definitely conservative, Baptist, etc. I remember, like, they would get angry at my wife and I because they would talk about our children being super disrespectful. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because we raised our kids to just that they can respectfully ask questions. They can respectfully ask why. But I remember it was just kind of that whole, like, children are to be seen and not heard idea. But I feel like that fits in with a lot of what we're talking about with the church. That congregants are meant to be seen but not heard, but as long as they're giving you money, we're good. Like, don't question authority.
Right.
Yeah.
And one guy on one stage will tell you what to think and what to believe and what to do. So just fall in line and everything will be okay. And that's
how it goes.
Yeah. So Stuart Delony is with me back again, host of the Snarky Faith podcast, not radio anymore, right? Just podcast.
Not podcast.
But let me just reiterate that he has a blog on Pathos that's excellent. I didn't know he could write so well. I knew he was snarky and entertaining and also deep and thoughtful, things like that on his podcast, but that also comes out in his writing. I like it. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Frank.
And I don't say that about everybody. Oh, so let's get to it, okay? So my main place that I have information for this comes from the Texas Observer, and I don't know whether they're conservative or liberal or whatever they are, but also there's links in it to the CNN article, several kind of major places that covered this recent thing where in last year's Super Bowl, there were two commercials selling a loving human Jesus Christ with the tagline, He Gets Us, comma, or period, all of us. It's a huge advertising campaign, mostly YouTube videos. You can check out all the YouTube videos under that title, He Gets Us. They portray Jesus as someone who understands our struggles because he has experienced them too. These slogans like Jesus was a refugee, Jesus rallied for justice, Jesus championed women, and Jesus didn't always feel welcome at church. The videos are available in English and Spanish, and there's really more views in Spanish than in English, by the way.
Interesting.
on most of them. The campaign also has a Facebook page and is on Instagram and TikTok. So your initial reactions, you talked a little bit before, but what, was your initial reaction? What did you think about these things?
They are, okay, marketing wise, advertising wise, they're fairly slick. Like, I will give them that. Like, usually, like, a lot of stuff within Christianity, when it comes to, like, how does it look, and kind of how does it come across, Christianity is not known for that kind of quality. Watch any Christian film ever made. But with all of that gloss, which is paid for by a lot of money, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
Disgusting amount of money. My initial reactions is, I think what we've been talking about, Karl, like it's just, I feel like faith is a product that needs to be sold. And that's really what they're doing. Sell it, make followers, make money, get power. I don't know. I feel like that's like the long game of it that they're not telling you about. But but I hate faith as a product. But they are selling it as that.
So the author says the first time he saw it, he gets this billboard as he drove to Pflugerville, wherever Pflugerville is. I guess it's in Texas somewhere. He said he was impressed, thought it was a wonderful alternative to the hateful words and actions of some Christians who condemn immigrants, LGBTQ plus peoples, non-Christians, and other people who don't share their beliefs. I felt the same way when I saw the videos, especially Dinner Party. And I was going to try to pull up Dinner Party real quick. Have you heard that one yet?
Oh, I have.
Just another editorial note. I heard Stuart try to correct me, but Wendy uses the pronoun her. I'm assuming that she identifies as a woman, not a man. So my apologies.
See, it made me just really wonder in this instance, in that wonderful drive from Round Rock to Pflugerville, are there other billboards that are of vast less quality in her? I'm not making fun of the author here, but yeah. So apparently Pflugerville is the center of culture.
Caring man took a walk. Everywhere he looked, people suffered. Anxiety ran high. Hope dwindled. Hatred rose. His neighbors had lost trust in the system and in each other. I need to do something, he thought. I'll bring them together and feed them. Around the dinner table, they can talk and see how much they have in common. Shared struggles, shared joy, shared pain. So he prepared a feast and invited all into his home. But some refused to sit at his table because they chose to only see differences. He was heartbroken because he wanted everyone to eat and be filled, not with food and wine, but with compassion.
I mean, I get it. What they're doing is they're retelling a parable, but also telling it disingenuously. I think also to like fit it into their weird little narrative of things, that if only we didn't see differences, then we could all be at God's table enjoying in the meal. And by differences, I just mean we all should be white. Now, I know that's not the visuals behind it, but it's one of those weird things where you just have like, our differences are what keep us from coming together. Yeah, I get that, but we won't talk about who's behind this yet.
Right. Right. Yeah. So
I don't want to spoil it.
The video is enticing. I mean,
it is. Yeah,
I'm moved, even if I've seen it several times, and still the music and everything works well, like a church service usually does, to pull you in and help you. The author says it's a great message that points out the obvious contrast between the inclusivity of Jesus and the exclusivity of many who claim to follow him. The only problem is that the sponsors of this massive ad campaign don't believe a word of it. Mm-hmm. That's the money quote right there, right?
Yep.
But they don't buy the loving, accepting version of Jesus they're selling. Is just the bait to attract people they hope to convert, right? So I'm trying to picture Ron DeSantis is not necessarily a religious person, but I'm trying to picture him getting behind this message, right? And even at face value, him going, "That doesn't sound like me." That doesn't.
Yeah, or
sound
DeSantis
violent.
just being like, "Wow, these people sound human. Maybe I should learn how to talk like these people." And no, yeah, I mean it's bait and switch, which I feel like that also we'll dig into that a little bit more. But that's evangelicalism, and we can dive into that. I don't know if you remember that, but I used to work for an evangelical organization for over 9 years,
Yeah.
and I have seen the insides and outsides of bait and switch, and this is very much it. Give them something enticing, send them to a place, and then hopefully we can convert them.
Mm-hmm. So he says follow the money. The campaign is funded by the Servant Foundation, which does business as the Signatory. That's a donor-advised 501(c). It's not required to disclose its donors. However, it does have an IRS Form 990, which is where they pulled all these groups. Not that they get money from, but who do they give money to? What happens with the money? I like to talk about this a lot in our discussions about religion. Where does the money go? When 70% of it goes to buildings and staff, and then the other 30% is divvied up between different things, and very little of it goes to help people. But what eventually does the group do? So
what do they do? Horrible things. Continue.
The largest cash grant they awarded was 16 million, and I'm not Marjorie Taylor Greene, so I can read big numbers like this. $16,657,150 to the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is an organization that supports strict abortion bans, an anti-LGBT hate group, as defined by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Texas-based, I don't know if this is 121 or 121 Community Church, got 10,800. This church states marriage is one meaning between a man and a woman, so they are in that camp. But also, I think, in the same anti-LGBTQ, I'm sure, mindset. Another group on trust the theory of evolution and with what the Bible says and so on. 40 Days Life got 16,000. 40-day prayer vigils to educate communities about the tragic reality of abortion and a call to repentance and so on and so forth. Many of these groups that they give money to say abortion is a stain. Very, very, obvious from the people they give money to that they are supporting a pretty conservative evangelical mindset and stance, right? Is that what you got from what you read?
It is. But I will correct you, Karl, on the one thing.
Do it.
It's not of anything of merit, though. Sorry, but you have to say the church's name right. I finally got it. They're super clever.
Okay.
1-to-1 church. Yes, it's marketing. It's so beautiful. And they probably have a scripture somehow, like something that is verse 1 or chapter 1 verse 20. Okay, never mind.
1-to-1.
No, but it's disgusting what this thing. It's a huge cash cow that they're using to raise money to make it look like things are nice and Jesus-y, and Jesus loves everyone, but we don't.
Yeah. And just like 1-to-1, our church is 1-to-1. We're very personal, except when the pastor stands up on the stage and it's 1 to 200 or 1 to 2,000 or whatever.
Or it's I'm the one.
I'm the one to you, the one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so for every one, I'll be your one. I don't know.
I'm the one for you to write a check to. Sorry, that would be 122 church, but
yeah. I'm glad you picked that up. I didn't. That probably is definitely what.
But this all fits in marketing. That was just like some sort of like, you guys are so clever. Did the Holy Spirit tell you that?
This was so this campaign was initially described as a $100 million campaign, 100 million 1 year campaign. Maybe I am like Marjorie a little bit. It's now stretched over 3 years at a cost of $1 billion. So most people don't understand $1 billion, right? So if someone figured out if you took $100 bills and stacked them up, it's about 18 inches high to make $1 million. Mm-hmm. But $1 billion stacked up in the same way, and $100 bills is like the size of the Empire State Building. It's 1,000 times as high. So $1 billion is a lot of money.
An ungodly amount of money for a marketing campaign.
Right. And so sometimes when we talk about, the amount of money that churches take in and distribute and religious organizations take in and distribute.
They're nonprofits, right?
Right.
Nonprofit.
Yeah. But they're buying, just as a side note, in one ministry, they're buying several jets, several $1 million jets, Kenneth Copeland, and then they're, spending ungodly amounts of money to do what these people are doing that we're talking about right now. It's the misinformation, drawing people in, whatever the message that brings them in, whatever motivates them when they get there, and then changing the script and hoping they'll help us with volunteer labor. Laura and I have recently got on that and how abusive that is in churches. The church brings in a lot of money. Most of it is spent on the building, the opulent building, on the staff. And a lot of churches, I noticed, the pastor and his wife go on extravagant vacations. The rest of the staff don't necessarily do that. They work long hours. Mm-hmm. And some of them get to go if they're in the inner circle, but mostly friends of the pastor that can afford to. And then it's all propped up by volunteer labor. Mm-hmm. And just, that's the way it's always been for all of us. We've never even questioned it, but it's a huge deal. Right.
No, I would love this. That's what people really should do. Like, if we were to be honest, we just need to have like a cruise where we just have a bunch of Christians come and serve pastors as they party and enjoy themselves on this as well too. And it's, hey, you get to ride on a cruise. This is beautiful. You're doing God's work and all of this. I mean, come on, let's make it fully disgusting.
Yeah, but
in how we're treating people. Because yes,
do you ever watch Below Deck? Do you ever watch Below Deck?
No. So, I know what you're talking about.
Yes, there's the Below Deck and these 6 or 8 crew members that just serve like dogs. But at the end of the 2 or 3 days, they get a $1,500 tip. In church, we don't get tips, right? But the more we do, the more holy you are.
Jewels in the crown, my friend. Do not tell me we don't get tips in heaven. We get jewels in the effing crown.
The stuff that lasts, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
A mansion. I can't wait for the. No.
So the Super Bowl ad was created by the Dallas-based ad agency Lerma. That alone cost $20 million. So those are 2 commercials, right? Mm-hmm. Two commercials. Obviously, $10 million a piece. I can't do math, even though I'm from Oklahoma. Bill McKendry, founder of Haven, the marketing, messaging, and branding firm behind the campaign, explained its purpose to Christianity Today. It's the goal that people become Christians, obviously. He later added that market research found skeptics were more likely to be convinced their values lined up with Jesus than with other religions. Figures like Muhammad or Buddha. That's I don't think any of them probably took it well to hear that, right?
No, but we have to remember, I think we're wrong in this and we should repent. really this is just all about, like, supposedly people didn't know enough about Jesus. People haven't heard his name. And this is really just trying to help Jesus, you know, because he didn't do it. He didn't do enough to promote himself. So come on now, Karl. God needed $1 billion to forward his word.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So he lists some others. The McKendry, the ad agency guy, lists some other of his nonprofit clients in his LinkedIn profile. They include the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Ark Encounter, a very important thing in the desert or wherever that thing is.
It's Kentucky. It's Kentucky, God's land, Karl. Come on.
Good old Focus on the Family, Young Life, and World Vision. All of these are conservative Christian organizations eager to save non-Christians by converting them. For example, the Ark Encounter in Kentucky features a life-size replica of Noah's Ark. In websites, we are all condemned to suffer eternally. Only Jesus can save us from God's wrath, and so on. And so, not even going to quote founder James Dobson. I just don't like that guy anymore at all. At all.
James Dobson, such a horrible person. I remember he made me afraid to change my baby's diaper. I remember he had something to where, like, if you don't do this right, and this is back in the like the 80s or 90s, if you don't change the baby's diaper right, you could make them gay. And I remember hearing this being like, oh no. But yeah, thank God for time and progress and getting out of conservative circles.
I'm going to skip down a little ways. Another company that emerges is the He Gets Us campaign is the Gloo, GLOO. Campaign's website, near the bottom, says it's powered by Gloo, a separate website for churches that want to get involved with the campaign. He further explains He Gets Us is partnering with Gloo to make it easier for churches to get connected to the campaign and access resources that drive more engagement. Essentially, Gloo is a social media marketing tool for churches, offering texting tools, a prayer platform, and other digital resources geared towards believers. If you have time, check out this article that we're talking about and go to that link about that marketing. It's a lot of conservatives rail against Facebook and things like that gather information, and this platform is doing exactly the same thing, if not worse. The gist of it, if I can summarize, is this, and Stuart, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the gist of that is that if we gather enough information, then we find those people that are struggling with life. We find those people that have mental illness, that are vulnerable, essentially. And then those are the people we're going to target. All right, so we're back. We had a little bit of an audio problem. Back with Stuart. So we're talking about the analytics that this website generates, and it's really just kind of a sickening feeling to even talk about it. That they sometimes, and it's been our suspicion, I think, Stuart, for a long time that just that the church looks for people that are wounded, and we really want to help them. In my experience as a church pastor and talking to other church pastors, no pastor really wants to hurt people, but you look for those vulnerable people because you think you can help them. And in this case, we're looking at a deal that's attracting people that are hurt, attracting people that go, yeah, the church has never been like Jesus, and then draws them in. But then it's not that they don't want to help them. It's that they really don't know how. And they don't even realize the disconnects there, that they're the opposite of that. They're not being like Jesus. They're not going to teach these people to be like Jesus. And so you called it a bait and switch early on.
Or it's like the other thing we were just talking about, like the table thing. You can come to the table as long as you believe everything we believe, and then we'll fully accept you. Yay,
Right.
God. Yeah.
Otherwise, we might be the bad guy in the story that they were talking about. So it's troubling, to say the least. So
I also, from being around organizations, pastor churches, and evangelical organizations, people, you're right. In their heart, they will say, we want to help people. And I think that's what helps them sleep at night. As long as they can say that mantra, then somehow the rest of what they do, which has nothing to do with that, is okay.
right.
Because I really think it's about, honestly, I think a lot of these are going to be about numbers. And I think we'll dive into this. A lot of this more is just about why they're doing this. Why? Because they're worried the church is shrinking. Oh, no. And it's all Jesus' fault because we didn't give him good enough PR.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the power of the gospel.
So a major donor emerges from the shadows. So during a November 2022 interview with conservative talk radio host Glenn Beck, Hobby Lobby co-founder David Green briefly mentioned that he gets this campaign. And we all know that David Green is a model citizen, right? Its president, Jason Vandiger, later confirmed that David Green's family is one of the campaign's major founders. So just like the My Pillow guy, the magic pillow guy that's losing it on every talk show nowadays because he's going bankrupt and things aren't going his way. I just don't understand how people could consider these guys good guys.
No, especially with, I know you have some of this in your notes too, but I mean, to really understand Hobby Lobby's rot, disgustingness, I mean, they were a major force behind the Supreme Court excluding contraceptives, excluding the fact that employers don't have to provide contraceptives as a part of medical care. So again, this goes back to I just don't get this. Like, I don't get how somehow a pill or a rubber somehow is ruining God's creation.
Yeah.
But these dudes think so.
Yeah. And I just don't know, sometimes how it's like you're saying before, the ends justify the means, that whatever end we want to get to is so important and it's so going to destroy the world that anything in between is justifiable, even traumatizing people, overworking volunteer labor, like we were talking about before, whatever we got to do to get there, because the world's coming to an end. And if we don't do it, something's going to happen.
But there is an evangelical belief that they, if you ask someone directly about this, especially evangelists, they'll probably say no. But everything that they say says yes. It's the idea that somehow they're trying to force God's hand. In their mind, if we get enough people to check the box through dumb crap like this or whatever and say they've become a Christian, then Jesus will return. So it's this idea that somehow evangelism is only about getting people as converts and not about changing people's actions, changing how we love one another and all of that kind of stuff. All of that's irrelevant. It really just, you need to check the box. You need to be on our side. You need to be on team Jesus, but the right team Jesus.
Yeah. When I was my last church, I was a Southern Baptist missionary. Technically, we were replanting a legacy church. That means the church has 12 members. We're about to go under. We got 47 cents in the budget this week, and if we don't do something, it's going to close down. We don't want to totally die, so we're bringing someone like you that brings some excitement to it, And I would, at that time, I would question leadership, and I worked under the North American Mission Board, and I would question. I even went down to visit where that headquarters is and everything, and they thought our church did great, and we were a great success story. But I expressed at that time, there's some, not in this way, but there's some shit wrong. It's not, and it doesn't seem right. It doesn't feel right. It's not growing. It seems to be shrinking. We got to be, and their answer was always, we just need to come up with some new methods, and it's essentially, we need to get He Gets Us campaign. That'll work. I remember the Jesus video was a big thing. I don't know if you remember that in your recent past, but sometime in the 80s, 90s, we were using this video, and it was like we're all Amway distributors, getting the initial interest thing out there to have someone watch this video. And then we need a new method like that. We need something new to pull people in. And I think that's the He Gets Us campaign, I think, is one.
The gospel's insufficient. Somehow that we need to add to it. This is probably the only part of the apocryphal books that the Baptists will be good with, which is just like the marketing apocryphal books on how we get people in the church, and more importantly, get them giving.
Right.
Now, did you say you've been to the NAM, North American Mission Board's offices?
I have.
In Atlanta?
Absolutely.
Yes, I've been there too.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know when you did this, but when I was there, I was kind of taken a little aback by how expensive and how large and how all these offices are. It's impressive. Thing they have.
It's in prime real estate.
It absolutely is. But if anyone has dealt with being a missionary, or even being a support-based missionary, which I have, it's one of those things where you're around this and you're like, oh, I had to raise a bunch of money to barely live and do this stuff. But man, the money, nice. God's kingdom is really in managing missionaries. That's where the golden goose is.
Yeah, sure.
That's neither here nor there. But that also, I remember North American Mission Board, and I was a bit disgusted with their office scenarios.
We got to go and tell our story, and motivate other people to build legacy churches and things like that. So the author goes through a lot of discussion about what was new to both of us, but really isn't new to us, is the Lausanne Covenant.
It's like my last name, just commit and keep going.
Yeah. I know the Baptist Faith and Message, of course, and this is pretty similar to that. You dug in a little bit to this?
No, I mean, this is, but it's, at first I was like, what is this? Because there's a bunch of different things that are like these, like you said, Baptist Faith and Message. There's been a bunch of this coming out, but I mean, all of this comes down to it's all about inerrancy of Scripture, which is a big deal with them, which is a big deal with Baptists, which leads to a lot of bad theology and a lot of bad reading of Scripture out of context. It's, again, they're so overly horny for evangelism that is really all they care about. Like almost in a colonial-like manner, like we need to go and conquest the great unwashed and the heathens, and as long as we're getting numbers, then we're really good about that. And which is really interesting too, because part of this whole what are we calling this? It's we're saying this wrong. The Louisiana.
Yeah.
Thank you. See, I made you look better, Carl, because I butchered it worse. No, but it also has to do with, in a certain sense, the way they look at stuff like social justice and all of that don't really matter to them. So it's interesting that they're trying to make this whole campaign seem like it's very socially justice-y, kind of, in small ways, but at the same time, they're really not into that. They're just seeing that as a hook to get people in, which is also gross. And again, the whole evangelical eschatology idea that it's all going down the hill and we just got to do all we can before the earth is on fire.
Yeah, I was trying to find the quote by someone that is fairly well known. Was it Kirk?
Charlie Kirk?
Yeah. So the reaction.
Yeah.
His reaction, and I still can't find it right off the top of my head, but if his reaction was basically, oh, this seems kind of woke to me. Right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what's happening with a lot of conservative people that are watching them, is saying that that doesn't sound like Jesus really to me. That's a little too woke, and we don't want anybody getting the wrong idea about Jesus, right?
Yeah, but they do this, and they put this out in public, and they put this in very public places. And all this it's just multi-level marketing that tries to funnel you into, what is it, like an alpha course?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That they're really trying to push.
Yeah.
And so it really feels very disingenuous. Like, Jesus doesn't see lines. Jesus doesn't care about this. All of this. This is wonderful. Okay. Yeah, we don't believe any of that.
Now here's our boundaries.
Yeah.
One of the first ones is called Be Childlike, and it has 11 million views. I don't know how many people saw the Super Bowl commercials and so on, but on the YouTube videos, Be Childlike has 11 million views, but only 2,000 likes. And if I did the math right, that's like 0.01% or something like that. There's several zeros after the point before you get to the one. And I think it's 0.01% or maybe 0.001% of people that saw this liked it. So a lot of people saw it, but then let's see if I can do some magic here and make it come up.
What a wonderful world this would be.
There's several just flashing, moving images of children hugging each other, a black and white boy running towards each other, and then hugging. Wonderful images, wonderful message. About being like a child. Patsy Cline is the music there, and an actual song that she recorded a long time ago. But again, that's not how evangelicals are, and I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. That's not how they are. It's not how the donors and recipients of these grants are acting in the world. They don't care about brown children that come across the border from Nicaragua, and many evangelicals believe that this message is too soft and it's too woke. It's more for them about seizing power. They don't believe this video, but they know it's what people as human beings really want, and it's what people as human beings really desire. But we got to put that humanness aside, right? So that we can do the kingdom work of conquering and attacking and controlling and things that really...
It's sociopathic if you really think of it. You know what I mean? Like we know how you feel. Like, we know your hurts, and we're going to show you that. We totally get what hurts you. It's probably us, but we get what has hurt you in the past, and then we bring you over to this, which is exactly the same as what you've had in the past. The motivation, I think, for a lot of this is, I feel like it's almost no different. I feel like evangelicals have learned very well from Trump about how to raise money off of outrage and how to raise money off of X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And this feels a lot like that. And I think their answer is, like you mentioned earlier, Karl, like the end justifies the mean. If people are like, oh, this is a little too woke, and it's like, okay, but that's the cheese we put in the trap for the woke people. Mm-hmm. That's how we get them over here to then de-woke them.
And it doesn't seem to be working. I'm sure that they'll have some success with most marketing things that people do. But I really don't even want to watch more of the videos. I plan on watching several of them, but I really, it makes me really sad. I have a friend that's helped with a lot of my healing, and he's done some focusing work and inner child work with me and so on. Mm. But he's now doing some hypnosis because he sees it as a real effective way to speak to the subconscious without a lot of, I got to relive and be re-traumatized by the story over and over again. Mm. And I hope that I'm making a point here, but he talks about things like, one of your favorite Christian crazies is Greg Locke, that you snark on quite a bit. for good reason. He's an asshole, and he's hurting people more than he's helping them. And what happens when you go to this quote unquote demon exorcism or however he describes that, is number one, they're using the same music, that people, what it does, and what's been proven that it does through Hillsong and all those places, is bring people into a hypnotic trance, and the message and things like that are hypnotic suggestions. But also, what Greg Locke does, in addition to that, is he triggers people. And then when he triggers them, he essentially, prayer essentially in a lot of cases is just regulating. It's what most people can do now with breathing and some of those exercises that help them regulate. Well, then you haven't done it, but you haven't done anything. You're convincing them that this was an act of God, that this was something supernatural, when all you're really doing is playing with people's emotions. And I think that's my final kind of summary of all of this, is just, we got to quit playing games with people's well-being and mental health for our own profit, for our own gain, for our own narcissistic ideas about how the kingdom of God is built. It just hurts me, and it makes me sad.
Yeah, with this, that's what gets me. It's just that I feel like I noticed this a while ago, and this is like even before seminary, being around Baptist circles, growing up in them, preaching in them. But overall, when you look at stuff, I feel like that in these conservative and evangelical circles, we tend to like to elevate the God of the Old Testament, and we kind of like to elevate the Paul part of the New Testament, and we need Jesus. Jesus is a useful tool in this. And I think that when we end up seeing Jesus as just like a useful tool because, well, he did this, we needed his blood, all of this, it's kind of a means to an end with it. And in their mindset, they like the Old Testament God who's angry and cantankerous and kills everyone who's not like us. Or the ways a lot of people can read Paul, where Paul oftentimes can come off like a dick in the New Testament. But then we somehow lower Jesus' teachings to where like, but wait, just remember, he's King Jesus. He's king. He's the one that already fixed it all. Mm-hmm. And we just miss what he told us. Like simple things, Sermon on the Mount, basic human decency things, and the idea that we need marketing to fix this. No, this is a church problem. This is a church marketing problem that right. They've said, oh, really? It's Jesus needs a rebrand. No, you guys need to rethink who the hell you are and what you're doing, and why, like you mentioned, contemplation. I would like for some of these folks to have a contemplative moment. Like, why do people hate going to church to be abused? I don't know. It's one of these ones where you're just like, what? Like, yeah, you guys need to do some therapy. You guys need to do some contemplation, because this is not healthy. And I think this answer is a great way to raise a ton of money and line people's pocketbooks. But the idea that like somehow the gospel is insufficient, the fact that Jesus tells us to love others regardless of who they are, offer them a spot at the table even if they disagree with us, like in conference to that the way they told the parable earlier, but that's too simple. It's too easy. It doesn't make us money.
Yeah, for sure. I am literally losing my voice now. I'm not used to talking this long during the day. Stuart, I want to thank you for coming on today and kind of hashing through this with me. It's the longest podcast I've ever done. That's why my voice is going.
All right. But remember, the word is this was terrible. It was not what it could have been because we were missing Laura the whole time. I know.
Absolutely.
Tell her she was missed.
People have at times in my life said, you know what? Your secret weapon is Laura. And I said, I already knew that. I know that. I've known that for 20 plus years. Now 30 something. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, she really is.
All right, man. Hey, I love you. Come back anytime.
Anytime. All right. Always love hanging out with you, man.
All right. the listeners out there, we thank you for tuning in. We hope that you enjoy this. Let Stuart know. Don't forget, check out his blog and his podcast, Snarky Faith. He's on Pathos for his blog, and not that hard to find. As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
You are seen
you are heard
and you are loved.